You're listening to Let's Chaat, Stories of Fellowship, the podcast of the 2019-2020 cohort of the American India Foundation Clinton Fellows. We are a group of about 20 young professionals in various parts of the social or development sector in India. I'm Anjali Balakrishna, one of the fellows in this year's cohort, and I'm your host. Here we are chatting, or chotting, if you don't mind a good food pun, about our memories and stories from the fellowship, living and working in various parts of India. The fellowship is a unique opportunity to learn and grow through unexpected challenges, which is made for some interesting stories. Every episode stands alone, with a theme that provides some loose unity, but every fellow interprets the theme in a slightly different way, leaving us with the delicious masala of storytelling. So let's dig in. Today's episode is called Naksha, Stories Lost and Found. Identities, cultures, and lessons learned, uncharted territories, and a journey without a destination. In the fellowship, like in life, you can feel like you're lost without a map. Sometimes you have to wander to find your way out. Enter Jessie Standifer, who is placed with Taisia, Turn Your Concern into Action, in Delhi. Her project involved communicating impact and creating a girls' education campaign called 1000 and You. 1 week in early March, she went on a trip with colleagues to visit their field team in rural Madhya Pradesh. The group spent around 10 days visiting Korku villages, each day in a new village, camping under the stars and holding meetings in the community chopal with villagers.
One of the early days of the trip, we were deep in the forest, hours from the closest village, and I found myself needing to use the bathroom, if you know what I mean. Surprise, this story is about open defecation. Just kidding, but that is where the story starts. Me nervously hustling as far away from camp as humanly possible, getting a little lost in the forest, stomping on leaves, trudging down and up over a hill, looking anxiously over my shoulder, before crouching through a barbed wire fence to head down into a private-looking ravine area. When I was finished, maybe you know what I'm talking about, but I just had to get away from the scene of the crime. I had to compose myself. So I quickly started heading back the way I came, hustling. And as I crouched back through the barbed wire fence for the second time, my flip-flop caught the fence and I was sliced right between the toes. Don't worry, my foot is fine now. But my sandal filled with blood, and embarrassed as ever, I headed back to the campsite, partially limping. I didn't want to seem weak, so I rinsed my foot off with water and I didn't tell anyone. I'll be fine, right? 2 days later, the small cut between my toes did not look so innocent. It was puffy, red, and painful. At that point, I honestly probably hadn't showered in close to a week and my feet were filthy, which wasn't helping. I was sort of limping and getting a little nervous, but still very much trying to prove that I could handle myself in the field. But I did casually tell my supervisor, Mohit, I tripped over this barbed wire fence. No worries, silly me, I'm fine. He did not find it funny, though. He looked at me very seriously and said, Jessie, health in the field should not be taken lightly. A lot of things can happen. And making his suggestion into a question, in very true Mohit style, added, if you want, we can go to town and get a tetanus shot. I took his suggestion and spent an hour on the back of a motorcycle to Roshni, the closest town. We did make a pit stop somewhere on the outskirts of town and paid a guard to let us into a massive compound to use their bathrooms and showers, which was glorious, but I'll skip to just after that, when we pulled into the government hospital. We hopped off the motorcycle right in front of the hospital doors. There was no one outside. Walking in, we were greeted immediately by 2 women, both nurses who worked at the hospital. And I swear before I realized it, Mohit had explained the situation, and within minutes my foot was wrapped and cleaned, and I had a bandage on my bum from a tetanus shot. I noticed the hallways were empty. There weren't any other patients. It all went so smooth, and the wildest part is that it was absolutely free. It was all so easy, I really couldn't tell you why I waited, but then again, I'm so stubborn, I would probably do the same thing all over again. After stocking up on chocolate and biscuits, absolutely essential, we got back on the motorcycle, and at that point, it was after dark, and without jackets, we had a freezing hour-long ride to the next village. In that village was the first time, funny enough, on this trip that there was a government clinic. That night, I chased local kids all around the village and completely ruined the bandage on my foot. Just before dinner, I decided to head over to the clinic just to pick up a few extra band-aids. In the village, the clinic was the only place with power. So although the clinic seemed closed, the doors were open and dozens of phones were plugged into every outlet. Folks from our group were hanging out in there and looking repeatedly at their phones despite having no network. I guess we really are addicted. Connected to the clinic was the house where the woman who ran the clinic lived. And so it took some prompting from the group, but timidly, I called into the corridor which led to the nurse's home, and almost immediately, I ran into Seema. After spending days with a group that I was constantly trying to understand, all of the conversations were in Hindi, and all the while trying to prove myself as this outsider of the group, Seema made me feel instantly comfortable. She was also in her mid-20s like me, and we talked about our families and ourselves long after she rewrapped my foot. Over broken Hindi and English, we bonded easily, which just doesn't happen often. Seema is from Maharashtra, not Madhya Pradesh, and she doesn't speak the local tribal language Korku, even after living in the village for years. She still feels like an outsider. But together, we didn't feel like outsiders at all. She made me feel right at home. While there are a million stories I could tell you from this time, stories about speaking more Hindi than I ever have, or making roti for the first time with Kamal, this story in particular is more about feeling alone and feeling like, as an outsider, I have to prove myself and still manage to find connections that transcend language.
Next, we're welcoming Ayushi Parashar. Now, we'd like to warn our listeners that Ayushi's story describes the consequences of domestic violence in the lives of the survivors she worked with. This may be inappropriate for young listeners, so please be advised. During the fellowship, Ayushi worked with Jagori Rural Charitable Trust in Dharamsala on the socio-legal implementation and impact of the domestic violence laws in Himachal Pradesh. She joins us now.
The turning point in my life was studying the Law and Social Transformation elective, which geared my focus from public international law to the development sector through the path of social justice and legal policy. This course elucidated the wide gap between the drafting and implementation of the law, leading to long-term social-legal issues, amongst others. The professor who introduced the course also introduced me to the AIF William J. Clinton Fellowship. Through this fellowship, I wanted to understand the grassroots realities in rural India and create some impact utilizing my legal acumen. At Jaguri, while interviewing the domestic violence survivors and attending Nari Adalat sessions, I realized that the domestic violence survivors primarily lose the bond they have with themselves and then with their loved ones. Though the domestic violence laws have been drafted commendably, the manner and scale of implementation contribute to its lack of success. Despite that, I believe that it can become a life-changing mechanism. I will share an insight into the world of domestic violence survivors, especially married women. Lost. While surviving violence, they lose their physical, mental, sexual, and economic well-being. As survivors, they're beaten, verbally abused, abandoned without food or water, locked in their rooms, restrained from interacting with their children and parents, amongst others. This shatters their soul and spirit into pieces. They lose connection with their bodies, mental peace, economic stability, and sexual choices. They are sometimes broken to an extent where they lose the purpose of living. During the interview, Reena said, I'm seeking an amicable settlement. I will have to stay with my husband for the sake of my children. And their children also bear the brunt of domestic violence. They lose their childhood, their education, access to their friends, and their bond with the father and paternal grandparents. Asha shared, "Since I came to my paternal house in October, my child hasn't been to the school. His previous school was closer to my matrimonial house. I don't have the finance to send him to the nearby private school." The young, innocent souls live with visible and invisible scars, and sometimes they start reflecting this in their future relationships. Found. When these women decide to voice out against violence, they begin to find ways back to their physical, mental, sexual, and economic well-being. Sometimes their parents and siblings support them. Sometimes they abandon them, especially if it was a love marriage. With the support of their families, friends, and the justice system, they start getting back to their normal lives. They get to stay with their children, who become their biggest support system. And a key reason to be found. Seema, whose husband abandoned her and their children for his second wife and children, said, "My children and I are here for each other. My daughters have even started going to the college." The survivors of domestic violence may take some time and courage to open a door for love and lifelong commitment again. Sometimes they find new partners, friends, safe homes, and employment again. Rohini, who remarried after divorcing her abusive husband, said, "I'm happy with my second husband. He takes care of me and I have a good life now." At the end of the tunnel, they find the self-confidence, self-respect, self-esteem, trust, and life. When mothers start healing, children start healing. The survivors who leave their abusive partners tend to move on as early as possible for the sake of their children's well-being. These children find their physical, mental, and educational well-being again. In the long run, the mothers and the children try to get rid of the scars so that their future won't be lost in the past. While attending community women courts and interviewing them, I realized the complexities of relationships and the additional burden of societal norms, which further suppresses the survivors. It takes a lot of thinking, effort, and courage to voice out and move out of an abusive relationship, especially with the ones who were meant to protect and love them. And to go through further suppression by the family members, local panchayat, society, and justice system as a whole is unbearable. It is the sheer inner motivation of these fierce women which protects them from breaking down during their journey to justice.
Support for this podcast comes from the American India Foundation Clinton Fellowship, a fellowship where American and Indian young professionals are placed all over India to work at and support organizations in the field of public health, livelihoods, and education. I'm Anjali Balakrishna, your host, and you're listening to Let's Chaat, Stories of Fellowship. Next, we welcome Eric Smith to the mic. Eric's project with the fellowship consisted of providing curriculum support, English instruction, and teacher training at the Marasi School in Jaisalmer, Rajasthan. Today, he is here to tell the story of how the Marasi culture was almost lost, an artist's transformation, and how the two found themselves in each other and manifested change together.
The Jaisalmer Marasi, a community of musicians carrying a world-class artistic legacy over 800 years old. Their ancestral roots trace back to temple and court musicians for the Maharajas and royal families of Jaisalmer. They are the oral heritage keepers of India's Great Thar Desert, narrating its history through a rare blend of sacred Hindu, Sufi, and folk classic music now spanning 38 generations. In the early 90s, this cultural legacy was on the brink of being lost, generationally enslaved under a demoralizing judgment system that forces Marathi men to perform for higher caste families, a system still operating today. Marathi men were choosing to give up their historical and wondrous music, attempting to find other sources of livelihood. Constantly scorned as Mugganyars, meaning beggars, and considered untouchable, this oppression almost drove a once thriving culture to extinction. In 1990, artist Karen Lucas, a purveyor of beauty, had already made a name for herself as a decorative painter stationed in New York. Her work featured in prestigious publications such as Indian Interiors, Architectural Digest, and House and Garden, even showcased at the American Embassy in Delhi and in the Vice President's office in Washington, D.C. But when faced with her own mortality, she changed. Let us hear from her own words.
At 37, a surgeon told me to go home and make out a will. Accepting mortality, I pledged to live with good intention. 2 years later in Rajasthan, I met the Jaisalmer Marathi, holding a brilliant musical legacy 800 years intact.
When Karen fell ill in the desert during her first visit, Marathi women cared for her, while the spontaneous eruptions of music she heard would change her life forever. Learning more, she empathized with their struggle deeply and committed herself to their cause.
I founded US-based Folk Arts Rajasthan to work in conjunction with the Marathi NGO, Lok Kala Sagar Sansthan, in Jaisalmer. I've lived by this one intention to be an advocate for the Marathi in an immersed way, by listening carefully and nurturing a deep, ongoing connection with this remarkable community. Colored by low caste status, I've witnessed their need and desperate urge to be recognized, to be heard, to have value.
While Karen and I endeavor for their recognition, we both acknowledge this important fact, that we will never live within Marathi skin. Striving for equality, we, along with the countless others associated with this cause, remain vigilant that our work coincides with what the Marathi determine are their greatest needs. And for the Marathi, they have long realized that education is the essential factor for change. This inspired the creation of Marathi School, a safe and welcoming environment where Marathi children can learn and ask questions. An environment sorely lacking at both the government and private schools they might attend. Schools where teachers ignore their questions, where they are segregated from higher caste children, and where they face consistent harassment from their peers, teachers, and even from the school's administration. The juxtaposed contrast between the inspiring humanity of the Marathi and the harsh discrimination they endure cannot be overstated. It truly is a transformational journey when one witnesses the combined beauty and harsh reality of the Marathi. I personally found a deeper sense of self through the Marathi. When I joined the fellowship, I felt lost in ways I could not understand at the time. I sometimes still struggled with depression, moments of utter meaninglessness. But the warm humanity of the Marathi brought me to myself again. Their hospitality and graciousness a seemingly endless well. Even in the face of such intense physical, mental, and emotional abuse, the kind that bruised their bodies, shut them out of schools, and denied them the same rights as those considered higher caste. Their energy seems to highlight, define, and reinvigorate. Grounded in music and community, more than once they moved me to tears with their sheer talent and soul. I will forever be grateful that their musical legacy has experienced a rebirth, and grateful for Karen's consistent persistence in the well-being of the Marathi. The collaborative effort of the Marathi-driven Lokala Sagar Sanstan, LKSS, and Folk Arts Rajasthan, FAR, has borne incredible fruit over the years. Since 2005, the Marasi have participated in FAR LKSS collaborative bilingual literacy programs promoting cultural equity, emotional health, and educational empowerment in spaces providing a sense of freedom and safety. We now have a new generation of literate Marasi students, such as Sattar Khan saying, "We can change our world with words, not war." After my time on the ground as a Clinton Fellow, I have faith that the continued partnership between FAR, LKSS, and AIF will pave the way for more progress and change. AIF represents a major milestone of progress by dramatically increasing the awareness in both India and America of not only the artistic beauty, but the untold struggles of the Marasi. The troubling probability of losing unique and tangible cultural heritage has faded. Jaisalmer Marasi have found receptive audiences, though many of these audiences still refer to the Marasi as Maganyar. But much more needs to happen for the Marasi to be able to live freely and justly, for they are still denied their basic human rights. There is no room in this world for hatred. Currently, this time of the coronavirus has left Marasi school student families without wages for months. They are now experiencing extreme hunger, violence, and lack of water during this blisteringly hot summer season. To learn more about the Marasi and how to help their cause, visit folkartsrajasthan.org. And if you ever get the chance, visit them in Jaisalmer yourself. We could all at one point or another benefit from the rich humanity the Marasi offer.
Just as Eric bonded with his host community, so did our next guest. In addition to producing this podcast, Ismael Byers worked for Youth for Jobs as a communications manager and art archivist for artists with disabilities under a special initiative, Not Just Art. Not Just Art promotes their artwork through social media, film, and exhibition. Ismael spent his fellowship in Hyderabad and found an instant sense of home in the city. Leaving was difficult for him, and he processes the emotions of his untimely and abrupt departure in a farewell letter to the city that holds a special place in his heart. Here, he joins us now.
Dear Hyderabad. Should I say dear? I'm not sure if we're that close yet. Where do I begin? To be honest, I've been meaning to write to you for a long time, but I've been struggling to come up with the words. I've never even had the chance to say goodbye, and I've felt so guilty for leaving so unannounced. And you probably don't remember me amongst the 10 million other acquaintances you have. We only knew each other for 6 months, and you never got to show me all of your favorite sites. How many times did you invite me to poetry readings at Romale, or your interesting sessions at Lamakan on art, theater, or gender equity, and I couldn't make it because, well, I thought I had more time. You know, I've been checking up on you, and my friends tell me that you've changed since lockdown. They tell me that you're no longer the rambunctious and popular city that you always were. Even the Charminar, during Eid of all occasions, stands quiet. I think to myself, how could you have changed so much? I'm back home with family, and they always ask about you and what I miss. Honestly, I haven't given it that much thought until now. And to help me process and reminisce, I had to make a list. Okati 1. The cool breeze during the nighttime Uber bike rides on Necklace Road, admiring the Buddha statue standing proud against a sunset backdrop in the middle of a heart-shaped lake. Honestly, I would fly back in a heartbeat with the one I love to see you again and to show her this indisputably romantic scene. Rendu 2. How I miss your food. I mean, my God, nothing is more Anthony Bourdain-esque than your street-side Romali shawarmas in Nampally, your homey Irani chai that tastes just a little better when you pour it from cup to saucer, or your indisputable staple, dum biryani. Mudu 3. While getting to know you, I was surprised by what I saw on the roads, the subversion of expectation. Women in burqas and teens barely old enough to smoke drive on their motorcycles during my commute to the office. I've even seen a baby sit on the handlebars of a bike, smiling like he was a king of the road. It was the coolest thing I've ever seen. And how I missed your post-work traffic after a long day at the studio. I never considered it chaotic. It's like water that flows and never crashes. And sometimes I stuck my arms out to feel the cool breeze. It would make me so happy that I wanted to high-five the driver right next to me. Nalagu. 4. Pure mosaic of religion, culture, and language. All a beautiful coexistence. Through a short period of time, I was able to witness so much. The solidarity that was Vatuk Amma on my first week of being there when I tried Aiskala for the first time. The vibrance and promise of fortune on Diwali as I stood with a dear fellow and her family atop a roof that overlooks the city as we cast spells of light with fireworks that permeated the night. And the hope for longer days on Bongal amidst children running around and flying kites that pierce the sky just the same. You were always so welcoming and offered hospitality through everyone you knew. I've never left a home without feeling stuffed and satisfied with pariyaram or bitter gourd, even when I said chalu or dinaru, which means I already ate lunch. You flaunt a diverse repertoire of language akin to Babel. Dakni, or what my coworkers would try to teach me alongside Telugu, is a local language that harkens back to your regal heritage. The beautiful amalgamation of Marathi, Telugu, and Kannada. Unfortunately, our language classes had to abruptly end. I do. 5. As I sit here, alone and pensive in self-quarantine, looking back, I can see my time knowing you in a different light. Know that during this time we've been apart, I found in our friendship not only peace, but myself. You gave me the confidence to dream again and to believe that anything was possible. Do you remember Sri Lanka, who, with no mobility in her limbs, could paint with her mouth? She's the one that taught me that. If it wasn't for you, I would not have met her and learned that empowering lesson. And how about the daughter of our caretaker, little precious Boomy, who taught me supreme patience? At first, when she would invade and terrorize my room every morning and urinate on my floor, I thought she was a spawn of evil. But now, I can't help but miss her cute smile and intelligible babbling and rants. Let's not forget Sumi, Rose, and Sangeeta, who all made me feel part of a work family as we would bond over anime at the office until midnight. Shrujana and Pallavi, thank you so much for always making me feel so at home in a city so far, far away. Our misadventures and food escapades are ones that I will never forget. My dear friends Pavan, Raushna, and Lalita, who I all met on a bad day that you all turned into my best. Thank you for your morning check-ins on my way to work, your late-night talks of poetry in front of the GVK Mall, and for letting me dance into the night with you all. Hyderabad, for all of these lessons and friends you've introduced me to, I say thank you. And I hope you can forgive me for not being as good a friend to you as you were to me. To the Lion City, I bid you adieu. Until next time, your friend, Ismael.
What a heartfelt letter, Ismael. I'm sure Hyderabad misses you too, as well as our next guest, Mantasha Khaleel, who also spent her fellowship there. You might remember Mantasha from our last episode when she shared some funny stories about adapting to life in Hyderabad. Here, she shares a poem with us about how stepping out of her hometown and living on her own for the first time helped her come into her own skin and find confidence.
I just don't know how to begin. I could tell a story of a girl, the girl who I used to be, timid and shy, seated in a corner with a book and pen. I cannot do this, I cannot do that. I'm an inferior being, I used to believe. You're a diamond, said mother. I told her, I do not feel that bright life would crush me like an ant under a shoe. The conservative world has clutched me so tight that I could not breathe, and told me to hold on to home and hearth, and cede my paper and pen to run their home. People around drained me, so I embraced silence and solitude. Hide my soul in the dark. I could spend days and days on my own without any human contact. Be in your limits, they said. Don't step outside. You cannot travel alone. Don't wear those pants above the ankle. That wouldn't suit you at all. Don't share your thoughts. You cannot express them well. Don't dream so high. You cannot reach those heights. All their words echoed in my head. I could feel the pressure to fit in right, that the world wants me to look a certain way. I once heard someone say, if you do not change, you don't grow. Even in the darkest of dark, if you listen to your heart, you can see your path. Let me be so strong that nothing disturbs my peace of mind, I decide. I'm the only one in charge of my destiny. To know my limits, let me test them. Before they cut my wings, let me see them, how far they could take me. From 2 different worlds, 19 wonderful Clinton beings made me realize my own spark. Treat your life as your masterpiece, they said. I could paint every inch of my canvas as I want. I could travel alone and breathe in the fresh and crisp air. I could express my thoughts and speak with different people. I could sing or dance and do anything which I want. The girl I was has changed now. Not in the way they expected. I changed how I see myself. I changed how I talk to myself and others. I changed what I allow in my life. But above all, I have not changed myself for others. The pressure to fit in and be anything other than myself, I created a revolution in my own self-care. There's so much more to life than me, and that is more than okay. I have learned to understand that although I am a small part of this world, I can still do big things. My truth is found in who I am, not who I try to be and what someone thinks of me. There's no one like me, and there will never be.
Well, thank you all for joining us today on Let's Chaat, Stories of Fellowship. The stories that were told here represented many pins on a map. Each having their own itinerary, the fellows embarked in different directions, sometimes getting lost, but also finding several things along the way. They found justice and peace, music and beauty, communities and friends, and themselves. Now that we have this map, let's bring this home and finish our journey. Join us on our next and final episode as we call in Auto to our next drop location on episode 5, Auto, Stories of Movement. I'm Anjali Balakrishna, and I'll see you next time.